Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our first stream of 2025 that is not about Skeleton Crew. This is back to our old and usual stream format. And for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, having just found us after or during Skeleton Crew, or found us just by random today, or if you're watching on replay, we do this every week, 7:30 Pacific time. We come and we just talk here with all of you about Star Wars and anything else you would like to discuss. Now, obviously, since it's been 7 full weeks since we've done one of these streams, there's a lot of Star Wars news and rumors and stuff to talk about. So we have a lot of material for today's show. Some of it very recent, like as of today, recent. Some of it rumored, like yesterday with the Padme story. And then also other things that we just haven't gotten to really discuss and give our opinions on across the last 7 weeks. So we're looking forward to giving you guys all of our thoughts on all of those stories, as well as hearing your guys' thoughts about all the different things that have been rumored, speculated upon, or just flat out announced or revealed by the major trades. So we're looking forward to talking about all of that. As usual, though, this is a live Q&A. It's a live Ask Us Anything, to be more specific. So this is your chance to ask us anything you want. You can ask us about non-Star Wars related topics. You can ask us about something Star Wars related that you've always wanted to know our opinion on, or our thoughts on a specific Star Wars related topic or non-Star Wars topic. Anything you'd like to discuss, send it into the chat and we will get to it first come, first serve. These shows usually last about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So over the course of that entire time, we'll be looking at the chat to feed these shows like tonight's. Although tonight's might be a little bit more topic oriented. A lot of times with these live Ask Us Anything, since we do them every week, there's nothing really to discuss. And this week there's a lot to discuss. So we will be on topic a little more than usual, but we'll be taking your guys' questions and especially kind of zigzagging our way through the chat here as we get in between each of these major stories that we want to discuss. So keep sending it into the chat. As always, first come, first serve. But if you do send a super chat, you get promoted to the top tier of the chat. We will answer your chat first, and then we will come back to everybody else's. Also, for those of you who are members or patrons, you have priority as well if you're on a certain tier of our Patreon and YouTube memberships. Though, if you're on Patreon, you could send in your Patreon super chat, or not, it's kind of like a super chat. You can send in your Patreon comment to the post I made in Patreon a little bit earlier today. And for members, we know which members are in the correct tiers, and we will try to get to your comments first above everybody else's. All right, let's start off first here. And hello to everybody in the chat. Anthony, Star Wars Order, Critical Thinker, Kylie Stewart, all those people down in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Keep sending in your chats. But let's start off with the thing that's been the big story of the day, of course, and that is that Ryan Gosling is in talks to star in Shawn Levy's Star Wars movie. Now, Shawn Levy's Star Wars movie, one that is amongst many Star Wars movies that has been announced over the last few years. This one, seemingly more so than Taika Waititi, which is still, not officially canceled, more so than Rian Johnson's trilogy, which is still not officially canceled, and then more so than obviously the canceled ones like Kevin Feige's movie or the Game of Thrones guy, DB Benioff and or David Benioff and DB Weiss. More so than all those, Shawn Levy's actually has had some progression, seemingly. I mean, not maybe as much as like Dawn of the Jedi, Mandalorian and Grogu, even more, maybe a little bit more than Dave Filoni's movie, and not as much as Ray's, where we like hear about these movies all the time. But Shawn Levy's is still on the docket. He is planning on, I believe, working on this next or amongst his next couple projects. So this is something that's relatively quickly going to move forward. And now, according to the Hollywood Reporter, Ryan Gosling is in talks to be the star of that movie. Ryan Gosling, of course, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood right now, especially in the last few years, was Cannes last year. He was in Blade Runner 2049. He's done a lot of great things and has really cemented himself as not just a dramatic actor like he was kind of doing in the early 2010s, late 2000s, doing a lot of dramas before he did a lot of rom-coms. But now he's got some like serious comedy chops. He's done a really good job of making himself a really funny person, a really multifaceted actor. And I think that style works really well with Star Wars. That, that ability to be serious but also funny when you need to be. But he's done it all. Sonic, when you hear that Ryan Gosling might be in a Star Wars movie, especially Shawn Levy's Star Wars movie, what were your thoughts immediately after hearing that?
I mean, very positive. I'm a pretty big fan of the guy, and I think you put a pretty good summation there. He has been someone that started off like in very critically acclaimed roles, but has become a little bit more of a very surprising comedic actor. But I'm not entirely surprised. I think if you were in an American middle school or high school since the late 2000s, early 2010s, on a rainy day, you went and you saw Remember the Titans, which is one of the earliest roles that he ever had, and it's hilarious because he's just this kid who's unable to like play super well, super fast, keep up with like this newly desegregated school and division, and he's just a super cool guy. Enjoys the music, enjoys the vibes, and he just has a good time, and he's just very funny in that film in the few sparse moments that he has. Um, so even when he was 18, 19, he already had some chops there. And then, he went into that whole like, stoic meme kind of that
Yeah.
dominates like IG and everything else. So you see on all these different reels and stuff where it's like, oh man, I see that. Always see K and always see him on the ground. It's like, oh, after a girl's left you or something, right? It's like, that's kind of the roles he's kind of mastered for a lot of his critically acclaimed work. But if anyone looks at Barbie as his comedic breakout, I mean, I think you guys are actually quite off.
Mhm.
I think the real comedic breakout was the vastly underseen but incredible Nice Guys, and unfortunately came
Mhm.
out the same weekend as Neighbors 2, and I guarantee you none of you have watched Neighbors 2 in the last 5 years and went, "Yeah, that was just as good as the first." No, it was not, and I say that as someone who enjoyed the first Neighbors, but Neighbors 2 was not great, and it swallowed up Shane Black and what Russell Crowe and Gosling achieved in The Nice Guys. Russell Crowe gets to kind of play a little bit more of the straight man. He still has some great comedic moments, but Gosling, he is throwing himself out there. It's not just like the delivery, it's like, okay, there's the physical, like the yelping and screeching. It's like, and the way he can like play a full drunkard and crying, and like it's like he's so self-deprecating, and in some ways so confident. Like it all works. It all works. It's not a role that I think I ever saw of him, and that was around the time I was like kind of getting first into his work. And then when he pulled that out, like in all the trailers and everything, I was like, oh my god, like he might be better at this than his like critically acclaimed dramatic acting. So yeah, I agree to your point. I think that is a healthy thing to have as an actor, being able to handle some of the more heavier material, more serious material, and then be able to like turn on a dime and be like, hey, no, I can make the jokes. I can make fun and light of like a solar system exploding. Like, Harrison Ford, oh, the Star Killer base, so it's a bit bigger. What else is new, right? Like, everyone can, if they can make a joke out of like the circumstances that are just very crazy in Star Wars, you've done it right. And that's how I look
Mhm.
at it. And yeah, I'm pretty open to it. I'm just also open to Shawn Levy. I mean, I know he's not the greatest filmmaker. I don't really enjoy a lot of his color grading. I do think he shoots basically everything the same way, but I've been impressed by his work in Stranger Things. He oftentimes helms the more action-packed and dramatic episodes. So I think this universe would be something that he'd be really well qualified for. He did make a big save with Free Guy during the pandemic
Mhm.
when theaters were desperate for any sort of film, and he was able to get that, another Ryan out there to, kind of save a few months of the box office. Yeah, I know maybe he's not the most appealing, but he has had a good track history. He hasn't really had any bad films recently. He's had everything at least be average or like doing above average. He's I think he did like the Trevor, or not the Trevor, sorry, the Adam Project
Yeah.
on Netflix, where the new Percy Jackson came for. Yeah, so like yeah, he has an eye for talent. He has an eye for navigating all these different franchises, young talent, older talent. And what we've seen here with Jude Law in Skeleton Crew, with someone who's kind of fit that Gosling-esque profile of suave, but also can do dramatic stuff, and then has a really underrated funny bone. Yeah, I think Levy could do this pretty well, and I think the fact that he actually, when he gets kind of attached to projects, he usually sees them out within 4 or 5 years at max.
Mhm.
That's like only a good thing for Star Wars. You need to start putting Star Wars stuff out in the movie theaters again. As much as I enjoy Mandoverse, it maybe didn't really make sense as an entire universe to be spawned out of it. I think maybe TV shows should have been more like secondary stories, kind of how like you look at adult books in a High Republic initiative, but then you've got the young adult ones, right? Like it should have been almost like that, like nice supporting material, maybe occasional crossovers, but never dominating. And I think that's what we're gonna see, unless we start going to more like the HBO level of like cinematography and filmmaking that we're looking for. But if we're not, then I think that's how these shows should be treated. Like keep them self-contained, have occasional crossovers, and let the big guys and big events happen on the big screen. And I wouldn't be surprised if Levy is able to bring out something that will at least get us the ball rolling, especially after Mandalorian Grogu really gets that first kicked off in next year. So I only have positive things to say about both. I think you look at them and you're like, that's such an odd pairing, but honestly, not so much when you actually see what they've been doing a lot more recently.
Yeah, and like Anthony's super chat says, and Anthony says, really excited for Dawn of the Jedi. It's supposedly going to be filming this year, and it is supposed to be filming this year. And I think outside of that being probably the next Star Wars movie out of Mandalorian and Grogu, this one is quietly moving up towards being also like a 2027, 2028 movie. Even it could be 2027. If they want to do two Star Wars movies in 27, they could do this one in 27. I think making Star Wars an event is still kind of the way to go until you continually wean everybody on to Star Wars back into the theaters. I don't think it's the right move to now go from not having Star Wars for 7 years and then having a Star Wars movie twice a year every year after 2026. Like, I don't think that would be the smart move. But if this is a 2028 Star Wars movie, or a late 27 if they're going to be keeping the May release strategy for Dawn of the Jedi moving forward and they want to go back to December and 27. 26 is just such a packed year. It makes more
Yeah.
sense to do it in May versus all the other movies that are all coming out around that time. But then I believe 27 is also going to be Avatar 4. So that might not be 27 in the summer anyway, or I mean in December. Anyway, Ryan Gosling, I think he's a great pick. I know Anthony at the top, you said, or no, Star Wars Order says I personally don't want Ryan Gosling in Star Wars. I I only can understand that from the perspective of like Star Wars. A lot of times with its films has gone towards either up and coming or not famous actors to really help that immersion. The prequels went with more up and coming actors. Even Liam Neeson at the time, he was big, but Schindler's List really kicked off his career, and that was in '94. Phantom Menace came out in '99. So he wasn't like the Liam Neeson we all know now. Same with Ewan McGregor. He had basically just had Train Spotting. There were a lot of up and coming, and Natalie Portman, Leon the Professional. So it was like it was a lot of up and coming people. Hayden Christensen was completely out of left field. The original Star Wars, obviously, Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, all nobodies. So
Nobody's.
and when we did even with the sequels, like Adam Driver, he was a nobody. He had been in movies, he had been in shows, but he wasn't Adam Driver that he is now. And Daisy Ridley was an absolute nobody. So we went that route with the unknowns a lot of times in Star Wars and the up and coming actors. So I get that with Ryan Gosling, but I think what Jude Law just showed us in Skeleton Crew, what we've seen with Star Wars is that if you're a great actor, you can blend into the role, you can make it work. I think with Shawn Levy, one of the reasons you went to comedy, I think with a lot of what you were saying, Sinek, and what I was going with comedy and my intro for this story, talking about Ryan Gosling's chops, is that Shawn Levy has basically only ever made comedy. So he has, unless he's taking on a completely different style, he's done comedy all the way back to Night at the Museum. He did Cheaper by the Dozen. He did all these
Yeah.
movies that basically his entire career is comedy. Even Deadpool and Wolverine, I thought he did a good job staging a lot of the action sequences, but it's a comedy. So I'm expecting this to have a little bit more of a comedic edge. Star Wars, we're never going to get a full blown comedy, but I think we're going to have more of a comedic edge here. And I think Ryan Gosling can definitely carry that. Will say more of an accurate opinion on whether Ryan Gosling's perfect for the part that they've written once we start to know a little bit more about the plot of the movie. But it's never a bad thing to add talent. It's never a bad thing to add arguably one of the probably top 5 most popular actors in the world right now. And somebody who's just absolutely become a superstar in these last few years off of I'm Just Ken last year. I mean, I think this is a great choice. And I'm very excited to see him in Star Wars. And it made me really, with one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years being Blade Runner 2049, it makes you really want maybe a movie at the end of the New Republic era or mid to late New Republic era where you could bring back Harrison Ford as Han and have Ryan Gosling and Harrison Ford together on screen again because their chemistry is great. I would love to see that, but also, I still want to go into other time periods and do other things. That would be more preferred, but if you're going to do something in this time period, it would be awesome to bring back Harrison Ford, and I think Ryan Gosling's one of the few people who might be able to bring him back as Han in some capacity. So that would be pretty cool. But let us know what you guys think of Ryan Gosling being part of Star Wars. He is supposedly the lead choice to be the main character in Shawn Levy's Star Wars movie. Let us know what you guys think in the chat, and we will get to your chats as soon as we can. Anthony says, I think Gosling was in Barbie, right? Yes, he was Ken in Barbie. And then Anthony says, yeah, I think Levy could be a good choice. Star Wars comedy would be cool. And Star Wars always has had comedy. And I think even if this goes, with the traditional work of Shawn Levy into more of a comedy space, it will be an action comedy or it will be mixed with other type of story. So it won't be just a straight comedy. I would be shocked if it is, but I think they're going to mix a lot of different things. But yeah, that's that story. Let's move on to the second story, which is one that is kind of more of going to be a speculation story when we talk about it here because it has been so far debunked. And that is that Natalie Portman is in negotiations for a contract to appear in Ahsoka season 2. We also had the rumor from the same source as well, Christian Harloff, who's a YouTuber podcaster who I've really respected for a long time. I've always enjoyed his content. I used to watch him all the time back in the Schmoes Know days and the early Collider days before all that changed. That was one of my favorite YouTubers and movie reviewers growing up. So I really respect what Christian has done. But Christian put out a report yesterday saying that he heard that Natalie Portman was close to signing a contract to return as Padme in Ahsoka season 2. He also broke the story about Embo being in the Mandalorian and Grogu as the main villain. Also, Ewan McGregor rumors. So there's been a lot of stuff from Christian about the Mandalorian universe and Ahsoka and all the stuff around Dave Filoni. But just now that we know that this has been debunked in some ways, I don't think it's still completely out of the realm that this could happen or is at least being attempted by Dave Filoni and by the people at Star Wars, especially now. We know Hayden Christensen's going to be in it. Heavy rumors about Ewan McGregor. Natalie Portman would make sense if you're doing a full-on flashback. Now, she doesn't make any sense if you're doing like a Force flashback or whatever it was that we saw in Ahsoka season 2, World Between Worlds, some type of like dying vision from Ahsoka, whatever that was. She doesn't necessarily make the most sense to be a main story character in that unless you're reliving a moment from the Clone Wars or you're reliving a moment from something in Ahsoka's life that we haven't seen. There were obviously characters in that sequence that weren't force sensitive, like a Captain Rex, but she doesn't necessarily make as much sense as Obi-Wan and Anakin if you're doing the whole Force Ghost thing. Obviously, she's not going to show up as a Force Ghost. But yeah, when it comes to Natalie Portman, and of course, Ewan McGregor as well, Sonic, what are your thoughts on both of them either possibly returning or being close to possibly returning in Ahsoka if this does shift in the narrative of this story?
I think it makes enough sense. It is just a matter of like, is Filoni gonna use it in a way that really enhances like what we're doing around Mortis? Does he really enhance what we've already known about these characters and give them like a nice return? Right. I mean, Ewan already got it, right? I mean, you don't have to love the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, but I think that that finale and just his characterization in the stronger episodes, yeah, I think it was worth it just for that. And the fact that there's persistent rumors of an Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2, yeah, I mean, I think he's gonna get another taste of playing Obi-Wan, if not the Alec Guinness Obi-Wan at some point, right? So, I'm not really worried about him. I think it would just make sense for Anakin and Obi-Wan to kind of deal with some stuff and get that old triumvirate of on Mortis back together and see how the connections to whatever is happening on Peridia that seemingly is related or is like the origin point of a lot of the stuff that they encountered years and years ago. Plus, it'd be really interesting to see like some more of the banterous humor between them that really dominates a lot of their relationship in Clone Wars, and kind of them being like, "We remember Ahsoka, but you don't. What happened on Mortis?" Like, but you're still more affected by it than even us, honestly. Which
Mhm.
I think that's a pretty fun balance to explore in both a comedic and a dramatic way. I think the Padme one, I mean, I'm never gonna say no to Natalie Portman. I mean, she looks amazing still. She's been in so many critically acclaimed films. She's become a better actress, honestly, than I'd say when
Mhm.
she was during the prequels. And she wasn't bad. And like, a lot of these great actors just had some very difficult lines and mostly blue screen or green screen settings. But what 5 years later after Revenge of the Sith, she wins an Oscar for Black Swan. It's like you don't just do that if you don't have a critically acclaimed career kind of coming into Star Wars, which she already did with like stuff like Leon the Professional kicking off her career, and then going all the way into now where she's still always at some sort of award ceremony, always nominated for something. So yeah, I mean, I would love to see a new like Natalie Portman look, a new Padme look for her. I think that's also one such an important thing about her character. Always the fashion, what she's trying to show off, what her role is in that story, and I mean, I miss Star Wars of the prequels kind of going for a little bit more like beautiful clothing than just utilitarian or hey, we got scrappers, let's put this all together. And look, no offense to Cal Kestis, but there's only so many ponchos that I could really truly love. So, yeah, I think we're in need of having a little bit more of just like the beauty and fashion that came with Padme, and she'd use it even in her like on field outfits too, especially during the Clone Wars. Oh, 03 Clone Wars, she's kind of got her own snow outfit and everything. Like there's so many ways to honor a lot of the legacy of that character that's only become stronger and stronger over the years, especially when you look at even not just what her performance was like, but some of the physical attributes and like the messaging, the symbolism.
Yeah, I think this. Oh,
Um,
sorry,
Fireside.
you cut out for me. I don't know if that happened for our viewers, but I couldn't hear you there for about 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. Hopefully you guys can
You're back
hear
now.
us. Yeah, I was just saying, I think most of her outfits made a lot of sense throughout the Clone Wars, throughout the prequels, besides maybe the Fireside outfit, trying to break up with Anakin, basically. That was terrible. But yeah, I mean maybe a Mortis vision, but if not that, I know some people have been saying like, oh, what if they just like adapt the scene from the one of the Thrawn books? I think it's Thrawn Alliances that she appears in the
Mhm.
flashbacks, the Clone Wars flashbacks.
Yeah.
It didn't really have a great adaptation from what I can tell in the comic form. So I think people would be interested in maybe seeing like a flashback and having that be the way that she appears. And that way you don't have to connect it to the force or any sort of memory. You can make this more of a way to like have Thrawn have like a couple of scenes or two in the show if they're really trying to keep him to that before jumping him into the movies or something.
Yeah, I've never thought about Thrawn alliances. That's a good idea. It just all kind of depends on how much Thrawn is in this show, right? Like I'm still unsure how I feel about which directions they're going to take Ahsoka season 2. Like most of me wants to see Ahsoka season 2 basically ignore Thrawn and everything else that's not on Peridia and just focus on that. I don't think it will. I think it's going to have a bunch of other stuff in it, and I hope that doesn't wreck the pacing. I hope that doesn't wreck the general enjoyment per episode, and I hope it makes the show better. But I think for me, with Ahsoka being the name of the show, with
It's gotta
all
be
that
yeah.
effort put into creating Sabine as a force sensitive in season one, with the cliffhanger ending literally with Baylan, and the Mortis gods, with whatever Shin's doing on Peridia, with Baylan and Shin both being kind of completely absent from the last 3 episodes once Thrawn shows up, and they're kind of just setting up and teasing what's going to happen in season 2. I would much prefer Ahsoka season 2 to ignore everything else and just focus on those characters and the complete transformation of those characters into whatever season 3 is, or whatever the future of Thrawn is, and see other things start to tease Thrawn as a big villain. Because really, Ahsoka, like, you don't necessarily need to have watched Ahsoka for Thrawn to be a big villain in the rest of the Mandalorian universe, right? He was on another planet in another galaxy, and he came back. Well, he could just be another Imperial who's out there, who's, ready to fight Mandalorian and the rest of the New Republic. If you wanted to tackle that in Mandalorian and Grogu, you can reference Ahsoka season 1, obviously, but you don't necessarily have to have seen how he came back,
Yeah.
unless you're somebody who saw Rebels or saw these other things that you want to piece it together, right? So if you're not a super lore junkie and you don't really care about the canon, then for general movie audiences, Thrawn can just show up. Like, he doesn't have to be somebody who has all this other explanation and backstory, and he doesn't have to be completely stuck in the Ahsoka series. So, in regards to that, I hope that kind of happens for him, because I think it would be better for the character, and I think it would be better for Ahsoka. But in regards to Natalie Portman, I want to see her back purely just because I want to see her have this like renaissance for Padme that we've seen for Anakin and Hayden Christensen over the last few years. Like, I want her to get that love back from the fandom. I don't think anybody ever really hated on her too much, because everybody knew she was super talented, whereas Hayden Christensen was the unknown. So he got more of the hate, and he was playing Darth Vader. So he got more of the hate versus Padme being the newer character. So Natalie Portman, I would love to see her get that return. I would love to see what 20 years does to the chemistry between the two of them, and what non-George Lucas
Yes.
writing does to the chemistry between the two of them. Because I think not only would it be great for Padme, but it would be great to have those two characters back in a scene, or meaningful scenes that actually really work. And I would love to see that. I would love to see that return. When it comes to the Ahsoka show, though, I don't know if that's where it makes the most sense, but if we if we're doing full on flashbacks of like part of her entry into Mortis, or whatever trial she has to go through, part of that journey is reliving moments in her life, or times when she might have regretted something, and Padme's along with that storyline, and Anakin, all these different things. I would love to see Natalie Portman back. I just don't know if like those appearances will have enough substantive material to make it worth it for Natalie, or to make it worth it to like really enhance the character of Padme. So I'm on board with this completely. I just want it to be something really great for that character, because she really deserves the second chance. She's been so good in books and stuff. She's been so good in other material, and that's not been Natalie Portman. I would like to see Natalie Portman, who's arguably the best of the big three in terms of talent and acting, and has gone on to a different stratosphere than really everybody in terms of awards and
Yeah.
and all that. I would like to see her get her like Star Wars second chance. And so that's the main reason I would be on board. Star Wars Order says, I hope Natalie Portman comes back. Then Anthony Tiff says, I would love to see Padme in Ahsoka along with Obi-Wan and Anakin, flashbacks and Force Ghosts, just like Ahsoka season 1. Then we have Kylie Stewart, who says, do you think Natalie Portman will actually come back? This is Kylie Stewart's son using her account with permission from mom herself. Well, Kylie Stewart's son, I think we both think it's possible. I think she is less, I would say this, I think she's far less likely than Ewan McGregor, because Ewan McGregor makes sense for the story, not just in flashback form, but he was a part of this Mortis journey. Obi-Wan was. Obi-Wan was a part of the Force journey. He is a Force ghost. I think if we just rip off the Band-Aid of doing Ewan McGregor as Force Ghost Obi-Wan, rather than just saying, well, because the last time we saw Force Ghost Obi-Wan, it was Alec Guinness. We can't do it anymore. George Lucas already changed that, so with Anakin, so we can change it, I think, with Obi-Wan. And personally, I think they should age him up. I think they should try to make him look as much like Alec Guinness as possible in terms of
Yeah.
hair, in terms of all that, unless you're doing like a Clone Wars or prequel era specific flashback, then he can look like Ewan McGregor. But I would prefer them to try to make him look like Alec Guinness for continuity. But I think Ewan McGregor is beloved enough as Obi-Wan and talented enough to you can bring him back and have him play any type of role, and we'll kind of accept it at this point, with especially with Hayden already being there, and Sebastian Shaw's Anakin, which I think makes far less sense than Obi-Wan showing back up. Um, but we've already kind of all accepted that's the way it's going to be moving forward since 2004's DVD release of Return of the Jedi. We've had to accept that. And so personally, will she come back? I don't know. I'd give it a 50-50 at this point, maybe even less, maybe 45-65 or 45-55, excuse me. But Ewan McGregor, I'd give like a 75-80% chance. It also helps that his wife is probably going to be in season 2. So I wouldn't be shocked if that's a driving force behind him returning.
Yes, Obi-Wan is married to Harrison Dula. This is canon. But no, yeah, I don't know. It's I think what Liam did bring up, like, is it gonna be substantive enough? I don't think anybody comes just to be an actor in some like pop culture adaptation, right? Like, especially when they've already had their run with the original story where they were the big leads and everything. So if Portman comes back in Ahsoka, like I said, maybe Throne Alliances. I want to have her show off a little bit more of like the classic Padme fashions, add some new stuff to what we've already seen, of course. Uh, could she be used in Mortis, kind of like how that vision of Shmi was for Anakin, right? Maybe. But I think maybe what something would be interesting is that Clone Wars always showed like hints and some few scenes here and there of her and Ahsoka having some great scenes together, like how much of a friendship and closeness that they shared, and how
Mm-hmm.
like that honestly probably is more of why Ahsoka understood that Anakin and Padme were together instead of just Anakin failing to hide that. I think it was more like she understood just at multiple levels with multiple different people in her relationships. And I think, enhancing that, like showing maybe a scene of those two and what Padme is feeling, what she's doing, and then what she's seeing of Anakin, maybe closer towards their time apart or something like that. I think that would be nice. I think that would be great. It's always a little sad to know that she reunites with basically everybody for a good portion of the beginning of everything going on with Siege of Mandalore, but not Padme. She doesn't get spend really a moment. She gets close actually, but not quite. So yeah, I don't know. I think that'd be pretty nice. I think that's a good way to like have a character not only be enhanced and built off of the foundation already there, but actually taking Academy Award winning actress and giving her something with real meat. And of course, I do want to see that dynamic between her and Anakin, but that's kind of how you can start that scene. Like have a little bit more of their private moment, their public moment, and then Ahsoka Padme moment, right? And sprinkle in her politicking and whatever that she does, in the setting that's probably where Anakin and her can be publicly together, right? And then I think you could see some like really interesting things about like teenage Ahsoka, what she was noticing, what Padme was dealing with as we were coming to the close of the war, etc.
And I think too, I mean, the other type of flashback we've seen recently with these actors returning was an Obi-Wan Kenobi, which started the episode, right? It was the cold open of the episode. Then it kind of phased in and out throughout the episode. They could do something like that if you're going to do a full-on flashback. And again, that's what I would prefer rather than force vision for Padme returning. Um, but you could also do something if you were doing a force vision. I think another one of the things that you could deal with Ahsoka is kind of the whole idea of what would have happened if she hadn't left the Jedi Order. Maybe you do something where Padme and
Yeah.
Anakin are actually happy. They've got their kids. You got little Luke. You got little Leia. You've got this kind of alternate take, this alternate world, this Elseworlds version, the what if scenario. And that's something you could do if she had to go through kind of another mental trial about the roadblocks in her life. Really tackle that whole thing. That's something that we've seen her explore and tackle in the past, but obviously not on in live action or on the big screen. And we tackled her relationship with Anakin in the last season. How do we kind of tackle what her guilt is towards the rest of the Jedi Order in this season. I think that's something that Filoni could try to do as well. So that's another scenario I think for seeing Natalie Portman back, and that could be a little bit more substantive if it was like a whole episode where she's just having this whole like flashback scenario or this like what if scenario. So that's another case. Let's see. Critical Thinker says not a fan of this at all, but Rise of Skywalker already did Force Ghost Han. Yeah, that was technically not a Force Ghost. I'm sure you already
Not a
know
Force
this,
Ghost,
but
no.
it's technically a vision or like a memory being replayed. But yeah, I wasn't a huge fan. As good as the scene is, I wasn't a huge fan of that. It really just felt like more of a way to get another like, you know, cameo out there so people would talk about, oh, Harrison Ford's in this movie, you guys should go watch it. But personally, uh, I just think I think this one makes a little more sense for the story than Han returning in that. Like, I think with Anakin and Obi-Wan already being there, with Ahsoka, with this character being such a big part, and you mentioned Ahsoka's relationship and friendship with Padme. She and Padme have like a lot of episodes together in season 3. Like it's kind of the first half of the season. There's almost every Ahsoka appearance is with Padme. She's like every Padme episode has Ahsoka. They spent a lot of
Yeah.
time together. So I think this makes more sense for Padme's personal journey. But yeah, I mean, I understand your concerns, especially if it is related to the Force.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it isn't a Force Ghost. It's a vision, almost kind of like the last imprint that Leia reaches out to Kylo to finally unlock her son Ben through the cracks to rip it open and kind of bear him to what's always been truly him and not what he's been trying to mask himself as. So again, that's something I want to see a little bit more explored with the Legacy of Vader comics starting this year and everything. But yeah, I mean, it is really just a matter of how you use an actor of that talent. Like, yes, maybe in the long run, Obi-Wan Kenobi's first season or the only season of that show wasn't great for like story plotting reasons. It was just like trying to force a fight and all that. Doesn't sit 100% well between episode 3 and 4. But we've gotten so used to the Clone Wars having like 5 or 6 different fights at minimum between Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Count Dooku, right? So it's like, when Anakin says, "Oh, my powers are double since the last time we met," that used to mean like, "Hey, it's been 3 years. I'm like 2 times better now." But in some ways, I actually think it is a little bit better that we've gotten so many Count Dooku encounters because if he was only 2 times better than he was in Attack of the Clones by the time of Revenge of the Sith, I would be a little worried. But he's here with no fear and all that, right? And that kind of comes off as more of a cockier line than just like a statement of fact, right? So I think that's how we have to look at it. And, maybe you don't love what's going on with Han Solo right now, but maybe more fleshing out, more reasons. Maybe that is something of more of an ability of Leia, right? That can be imprinted in the same way here. Whatever is going to happen with Padme, flashback, Elseworlds, however you look at it, it should only be done to enhance the character, to improve it. And I think for the most part, just getting a little bit more of that downtrodden Obi-Wan worked for me. It was just a matter of execution during a COVID era with limitations there. And I mean, that was still a great duel there at the end of the day. So I think now in 2025, 27, whenever it comes out, if she is truly back in Star Wars, I think you can do some really incredible stuff. And there was always rumors of like, hey, we're gonna get the Battle of Jabin flashbacks. That's why we have Jabim as the planet in Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Maybe now we get to see them try to take a little bit more of a full-fledged deep fake and have everyone kind of de-age like how Anakin was in Ahsoka versus or Hayden was in Ahsoka versus Obi-Wan Kenobi. So why not? Get the whole crew, make them look how they did. Everyone's clamoring online, "Oh, let's make a" it's like the lowest common denominator. "Let's go for a live action Clone Wars show," even though we got so many episodes of one, but use it in the key pivotal scene. I think that's fair, and I think that's how any scene that's kind of been done in Star Wars that doesn't necessarily land the first time should always be looked at. Like, does it eventually enhance it? Yes, because we did these couple steps to get to that point, or is this one attempt a swing and a miss, or is it a huge, huge success? And you're always going to aim for the huge success. It's always going to be at the end of the day how people look at it, how they view it, and how they receive it.
Right. And I think, Clone Wars as well in live action. It can work as long as they're doing hyper focused storytelling. Like
Yeah,
you
like super.
pick one battle that we haven't seen yet and do it. And then the whole show is that. The whole season is that, like 6 episodes, 8 episodes of this one epic battle, or uh, do a moment in each character's lives and do like Clone Wars esque, do 3 episode mini arc kind of thing. You can do something like that, but don't necessarily retread things we've already seen in the Clone Wars. We've done so much Clone Wars, 7 seasons plus. If you want to count Legends, all those books, all the 2003 stuff, there's no point in going back to that well unless you have something specific to tell. Super chat from Toydarian Dan. Thank you so much, Toydarian Dan. Says, if Han Solo can be Red Hulk, then I guess Ryan Gosling can be in Star Wars. Yeah, anything's possible with the crossover. I mean, I think, especially with Disney, it seems like when they develop good working relationships with certain people, they constantly bring them back. They go back to that well. And with Shawn Levy directing this, it could be possible. Harrison Ford seemingly likes working with them, even though Star Wars might not be his thing. Red Hulk, Indiana Jones, all these different things in the last few years. He seems to really enjoy that. So thank you so much for the super chat again. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing if Ryan Gosling does actually show up in this movie.
I'm pretty excited to see him Hulk out, he's always kind of like gone on talk shows and try to do the angry thing where he's just like frustrated and mad and like roars out loud. And I think that's actually perfect for Red Hulk. I don't know how he's gonna do as Thaddeus Russ. That's a whole different bag to, I think Hurt was a little bit more of what I imagined that character to be from the comics, but that's it's not like Harrison Ford's any slouch. He's Oscar nominated. He's definitely had some great dramatic roles. It's just that he happens to be so good at these pop culture iconic roles that are very action heavy, adventure heavy. So yeah, like Liam said, I'm just excited to see what he can do. He's kind of taking a little bit more of these like last few years of his career as like let me try out a couple things. He's got that show Shrinking on Apple TV that I think he was Emmy nominated for. He's kind of gone back into the well of some of his classics. He's doing new things because it's like, hey, I've never been in a Marvel movie, but that's kind of like a big thing now here in the later years of my career. Why not? Like, it seems like a
Mhm.
fun time. Many great actors around my age too, like Samuel L. Jackson, who's in it, who's is also a Star Wars royalty. So why not, right? So I think that's exciting for him, and in that same way, I think Gosling can do that, right? I think Gosling the one thing about him compared to, like, other prestige big name actors, right? He's not a Reynolds where it's like, okay, you're only gonna see Ryan Reynolds,
Right,
right?
right.
If the one thing you criticize Gosling for is that sometimes he plays just the stoic, right? He just plays the very bland, like, 1,000 mile stare character sometimes. But I don't really ever buy into that. I think he always plays roles that have that quality, but then everything built around it is, a little bit more softer, a little bit less dialogue heavy. And Star Wars is very rarely not dialogue heavy, so I think you can have him play something very similar to what Jude Law did, where you can have these big tonal shifts. And again, it kind of comes down to if an actor is capable of doing that. And I think he's proven that over the last 6, 7 years of a little bit more of that comedic slant that he's taken on. I know there's Fall Guy this year. I didn't get a
Mhm.
chance, or last year, but I didn't get a chance to watch it. And I've heard great things about that too. So Fall Guy, uh, Barbie, obviously, and then now The Nice Guys. So I think those are 3 huge hits. I mean, I'm completely blanking on that film from that what he did with Steve Carell. It's, God, shoot, I'm blanking. It's a comedy role, but he's not really playing super
Mm.
comedic. But, it's one of my favorite feel-good comedies. Uh,
Oh yeah,
um,
Crazy Stupid Love.
Crazy Stupid Love, yeah,
Yeah.
and he's really good in that because he's playing, like, the machismo character, and then he still has, like, some very great lines that are super funny with, like, a very straight face. So there's a lot more flexibility than I think people are giving credit for. Go look up some of his comedic stuff. Until recently, he might not have been, like, the show, like, stealer, but now he kinda
Yeah.
is that guy. It's kinda like
Yeah.
films are built around his comedic ability, and he can
Yeah.
still turn on that dramatic charm. I mean, 2049 was 2017. It's not that long ago, right? He's done some great, great serious roles in between since then too. So
Yeah.
I don't get this idea that he can't be in Star Wars because he's never really felt like a someone who's like tied to every single character. Maybe tied to an archetype of a character that he constantly plays, but never a single character.
Yeah. I mean, even the year before that, he did La La Land, right? So, like, he's
Yeah,
got
exactly. Yeah.
all these different facets to him. He's one of the he's definitely one of the most multi-talented actors in
Yeah.
Hollywood. Even with his singing, he can get there at a
Yeah.
certain level. He might not be able to rock out with the best of them, but he can sing pretty well. So, if there's any singing in this movie too, he can do that. Let's get to our last big story before we move mostly to the chat and then sprinkle in some of these smaller things that we've missed over the last few weeks throughout the show. But the big story and another big news coming out of today from StarWars.com itself is that Star Wars 2025, or Volume 3, if you want to call it, some people label them that way, but Star Wars from Marvel Comics is returning on May 7th, 2025. It'll be obviously the Tuesday after May the 4th, and it is going to be written by Alex Segura, who has written Star Wars comics here for the past, what is it, 12 weeks? That was it a weekly series, The Battle of Jakku?
Mostly
Doing The
weekly
Battle
with
of
some
Jakku.
gaps in between. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, he's done that for leading up to this. I think we should have all seen this coming just because he wrote this Battle of Jakku series. Before that, he wrote a frankly mediocre Star Wars book, Poe Dameron Freefall, about Poe Dameron and why he's a spice runner. But I tend to give more of the handcuff of that to the like kind of ludicrous idea that he was going to be a spice runner from the Rise of Skywalker, and he was trying his best to make it work, but it does come off as pretty formulaic. Anyway, talking specifically about comics, Alex Segura is going to be writing, and I think even more excitingly, Phil Noto is going to be drawing, and not just doing covers, but drawing the actual comic book, which is pretty awesome. We're going to get page-to-page art from Phil Noto. This is coming out, like I said earlier, May 7th, 2025. And the quote from Alex Segura is that now that we've put the period at the end of the Galactic Civil War with the Battle of Jakku, we can speed ahead into a new uncharted era with some new galactic threats, foes, and mysteries for our beloved heroes to grapple with, blending the familiar with the new and the shocking. These stories will be packed with action and character, moments Star Wars fans have come to expect, featuring twists on the galaxy and landscape we know, with an eye toward making sure people can jump in easily and with any issue. We can't wait. So I think that's a pretty meaty quote to have there. There's also a quote from Phil Noto about how great Alex is. So I won't bore you reading that one. If you want to read it, go check out StarWars.com's article on this topic. But the art looks great, as always, from Phil Noto. They released 2 different covers for Star Wars #1. But as for kind of the elephant in the room, obviously, this is jumping into the New Republic era. What does that really mean for these characters' appearances and future things in the Mandalorian universe? And frankly, to start it off, nothing. This doesn't mean anything because we got 5 years basically in between Return of the Jedi and the Mandalorian. Battle of Jakku happens 1 year after Return of the Jedi. So there's basically 4 full years that we don't know anything about with these characters outside of the odd appearance in random things, some Battlefront stuff from Battlefront 2 that was very short. So basically nothing about these characters in this 5 year period. It sounds like this is going to be picking up pretty closely to where the Battle of Jakku left off. Obviously, same writer, so that makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine with how important and how sparsely these characters have been treated under Lucasfilm as they figure out what to do with them in the main continuity, I would think it's almost kind of a mandate to not get into the Mandalorian timeline yet. Maybe we will eventually, and maybe by the time that's all wrapping up and they figure out what to do with Luke, Han, and Leia in that story, the comics will kind of catch us up to that point, kind of like we have seen recently with Jason Aaron and Kieran Gillen and Greg Pak's runs catching us up between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and then Charles Soule's run catching us up between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I think this will be targeted towards catching us up to whatever their story is during this whole Mandalorian event. But I would be surprised if it takes place actually during that, and this is the only version of these characters we see is in this comic book. But Sonic, You read all of Battle of Jakku. I haven't finished it yet. What are your thoughts on Alex Segura taking over as the mainline Star Wars author, writing the next ongoing?
I think when if you asked me like 18 weeks ago or something, I would have been a lot more hyped, a lot more jazzed for it. Not so much anymore, unfortunately. It's just I don't know. I think Baljaku that first one started fairly well, and then it just started getting really weird with the Republic under siege. Like Insurgency Rising is basic, but I think it's basic and gets a lot of character stuff right with Leia, especially a lot of continuation with Soul achieved in his run, and then Luke. I think he nails the Luke that we see in Battlefront 2 and everything. So that wasn't a problem for me. It's more Last Stand, which it's ambitious, it's fun, and I know the 4th one is due out at midnight, so still waiting on that one. Um, I don't think I actually finished the last issue, but yeah, the continuity with the Aftermath trilogy is wow, it's just out of the window right now. I'm really hoping it's intentional. Segura tweeted out like, "Yeah, no, like if I've done my job right, like it'll all make sense by the final issue." And I'm hoping it's because it's like an unreliable narrator, like maybe somebody who's been captured saying a bunch of nonsense, like Adelhard, like this is what hell happened, this is how it went down, and he's just like executed in front of like the Shadow Council or something. I don't know, like something crazy, right? Or, if we're gonna get really funny, just go like with one of the wills and be like, "Oh man, I mixed a couple of these history books together. A couple of these pages got stuck. I actually kind of messed up a couple things here." Kind of go for a very meta, humorous way of looking at the. I'm like, yeah, you get the gist. They were there, they did their thing, and they fought this guy most of the time. But I don't think that's gonna happen. That's really unfortunate because they reference so many things in Aftermath that it's not just like, "Hey," it's like, "Oh, that's the thing happening." It's like you're trying to tie it in, right? So, yeah, I don't think 12 issues was right for it. I think it should have been closer to 20. I think it needed a little bit more to be spread out. It's very unfocused, and then for some strange reason, um, Republic Under Siege is a lot of setup in the same way Crimson Reign was. I don't really understand that because it doesn't seem like a lot of setup that has ultimately a lot of payoff for Last Stand. Because Last Stand is dealing with a lot more stuff tie in with Battle of Jakku and a lot more references there. It's a weird one. It is. I'm not very pleased with where it is right now. I think I can digest it if this 4th issue finally clarifies things and nails things down. I don't expect it to. So yeah, I'm a little lessened in my excitement, but again, Phil Noto, I think he just makes incredibly great pencil work. He really carried a lot of those earlier issues, which I think were still great of Poe Dameron, but, like, they were still trying to find the footing after that first arc, and I thought it was great. So I'm excited to see him. I think this should be a run that is only, like, 25 issues because I think this should just be more of, like, setting the stage for, like, the scope of the galaxy that the main characters are involved in. I don't want a 50 issue series as much as I enjoyed the Star Wars 2020 run and the Vader 2020 runs, and I think Star Wars 2020 still did a better job about using its 50 or not 50, yeah, 50 issues I don't know how many, it was 51 or something. Um, it, I don't know. It was just it's too much. And I don't think comics should ever be used as a medium for telling storytelling that is more character heavy. Like it can't. Like I know that's probably upsetting a lot of Marvel and DC fans because there's been incredible runs and all that. But Star Wars, even I don't know, you can say like, "Oh, Star Wars Comics of Legends had that." Not really, honestly. Even the most famous ones like Dark Empire and all that, I've never really found characterization to be something that I love about them. It's more just like the incredible visual fidelity that you can kind of get with some great line work, some great penciling, some great watercolors like you can see in Dark Empire and all that. That's kind of where that medium shines with Star Wars, which is, a very visual heavy franchise. So, how it's been used in Battle of Jakku, not a big fan of because it feels still fairly constrained by trying to tie in everything and then not really doing too much until kind of the last issue-ish with the actual Battle of Jakku. But I think this run with pirates kind of being kind of a focus here, it seems like, and a little bit more of like just what these initial threats are that called them out and like what they're trying to set as a foundation for the New Republic while they're entering into more of their specific zones in life individually. Han and Leia and Luke with his academy and all that. Yeah, I think it could be great. I think it can be great. I think without the Battle of Jakku trying to tie in everything, Segura might do a much better job. Uh, but I think at the end of the day, keep it to 25 issues. Make sure that you can have space for books and stuff. Tie in the stuff that doesn't need to be books, like, for example, Shadow of the Sith, the acolyte, the former acolyte that they meet there, right? That Luke goes to. You can have their encounter happen in this book. I was surprised it didn't happen in the Battle of Jakku stuff. So yeah, I think that's probably the way I would look at it. For me personally, that it should be something that has potential to be a lot more unconstrained, have some setup leading into New Republic era stuff that is more relevant to the Mandoverse, but it should still leave space for these characters to kind of go with their legends portrayal of like, hey, let's get most of the big story that they need in books. If you wanna do animation, great. If that's what has to be done now with all the big money of Disney, I'm fine with that too, because you can do a lot of serious stuff with animation regardless of age rating, whether it be TV PG or TVY7 as you saw between Clone Wars and Rebels. It's just that comics, the way that Marvel's handling them, I don't think it really works as well as it did maybe when they first started.
I think that's fair too. And I think as you get closer and closer to The Mandalorian, it's going to get even more and more kind of like redundant and maybe less important and just feel unnecessary. Whereas when we were originally tackling the time period between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, knowing we weren't going to get young Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher, knowing that it was leading up to that specific time period, kind of redoing the Marvel comics of old as well. All of that spirit, I think, really brought a lot to the early arcs of that series. And then when that started to phase out, they switched writers and they came in with Kieran Gillen, who did a great job revitalizing the book when Jason Aaron's stuff started to get stale towards the end.
Yeah.
And I kind of hope they do that on this one because if they are tackling 5 years, we just did 50 issues on 1 year with Charles Soule, and it did start to feel dragged out. As good as Charles Soule is, started to feel dragged out. Didn't end as strongly as it could have if it was more succinct. I think this you either make it more succinct or with a 5 year gap, technically, if that's what they're going to do, or 4 year gap between Battle of Jakku and Mandalorian starting, if that's what you're going to focus on, then I think having multiple different writers is kind of the obvious way to go. I mean, it's really hard for any one writer to keep material going for more than 30-ish issues. And I think that's usually when you start to see a lot of these runs fall off. And it's the all-time great authors, comic writers really, that are able to do that. It's the Jeff Johnses of the world who did Flash, and then he also did Green Lantern like that. It's the even some of the greats who were on the top of their game when they started ongoings, like a Tom King with Batman. By the time he got halfway through, it completely fell off, and he had to get to 80 issues. And at issue 50, it was like, well, there's nothing here left to say. And I think it would be smart to kind of bring that original 2015 run style back. Give I keep wanting to say Gene Segura because that's a baseball player. Give Alex Segura the chance to tell his story, tell the stories he's been coming up with, and when he wants to move off the book, bring in a new creative team. And I think that should make Star Wars 2025 one of the best runs yet, if that's really the purpose. But looking back at his quote, I'm wondering what the overall structure of this type of comic is going to be. I mean, even the description on StarWars.com's description of the first issue, and it really hits 3 points. It's talking about what Luke's doing, what Han's doing, and what Leia's doing, and they're all doing kind of different things. Is this a book that's going to be a little bit more focused? Is it going to be like, okay, we're going to do a 5 issue arc and it's going to be all about Luke, and then the next arc is going to be all about Leia, and then the next arc is going to be all about Han? Or are we going to do it more like this first issue where we're zigzagging stories, we're crisscrossing? Because one of the things that worked so well about 2015 with Aaron was that everybody was together all the time, right? And then Charles Soule didn't get to write Han because he's frozen in carbonite. So you have kind of these two storylines going on with the Luke with the Jedi stuff, because Luke is a very different path between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi than Leia and Chewie and Lando, right? So he had to kind of divide it into two different stories. Whereas this one, you can kind of be more back to the version we saw in 2015. You can have a Luke that's more entrenched with the post battle stuff. We can have a Han and a Leia who are dealing with, starting their family, because they start their family much earlier than they did in Legends, where they wait 5 years to have their first kids. Here, they have a kid immediately after the Battle of Endor, and within, I believe, Ben Solo's birthday is in 4 BBY, so we should be dealing with that as well. So there's a lot of different factors. Ultimately, could kind of lead into Luke's early decisions. We know Ben's not on his Jedi Academy in The Mandalorian; he's just barely building it. So he's doing something in those 5 years that led up to that decision to ultimately build his Jedi Academy, which does make Ben a lot older now versus what the Jedi Order would have, taken these kids when they were like 2, 3 years old. So there's a lot of factors and a lot of lore you can play with here. Hopefully Alex has that all kind of outlined and he's got some ideas for where he wants to go. And when he's done, we can bring in the next person. I'd love to see Jason Aaron come back and kind of put another stamp on it as well. Somebody like that. But overall, I'm excited that this is announced, because I was worried that Star Wars comics were kind of die in terms of the main line, that it was kind of over until they figured out what they were going to do. And maybe we'd have to wait a year, 2 years, 3 years. They're coming back, what, like 6 months, 7 months after it ended? Now they're going to be back in only 4 months after Battle of Jakku ends. So seems like it's been planned. It seems like the transition should be pretty smooth, and I'm looking forward to it, even if Alex Segura is not, resume wise, one of my favorite Star Wars authors currently. Like when Jason Aaron came in, I was a huge fan of his Thor work and a lot of his other Marvel work. And when Charles Soule came in, and he was already the best Star Wars comic writer of the last 20 years and the one of the great comic writers up and coming recently with his runs on Daredevil and the like as well. So looking forward to the series, and I'm looking forward to Alex Segura wowing us, hopefully, with it. Let's get to the chat, though, because we've gone for about an hour with these stories, and we want to hear what you guys have to say. Again, this is Ask Us Anything, so send in anything you want. I see a lot of different comments about a lot of different topics. It doesn't have to be Star Wars related. It can be related to anything you would like to discuss. Send it into the chat. We're going to take comments here for a while. There are some things that I would like to touch on in terms of smaller scale stories, and some things that you guys might have missed if you're not watching our Skeleton Crew coverage. Like we did kind of talk a little bit last week about Rory McCann with the Baylan recasting, but a lot of this stuff is older news now at this point, 2-3 weeks old. So we'll get to that a little bit later if we can, but let's start with your guys' questions. And we have answered a few of them already, but up to, I believe, Anthony. Yes, this one is the first one we haven't answered so far, and it is opinion on Nosferatu. I saw it a few weeks ago. It was awesome and intense. Bill Skarsgård was amazing. It becomes Robert Eggers' highest grossing movie. Yeah, so, okay, I was reading the rest of it to see if any of your other comments related to Nosferatu. I did see it about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. Absolutely loved it. I mean, no, surprise, surprise, if you guys watched any of these streams, you ask us about our favorite filmmakers or favorite movies. I always say Robert Eggers. Have been on the hype train since The Witch. I love his movies. I was very excited for this, and this is a very Robert Eggers movie, on top of being a great adaptation of Nosferatu and a really strong Dracula movie. This is everything I wanted and more. I can't wait to see it a second time, because I hear for a lot of people, they say like the story works for them even better the second time. But visually, this is an immaculate movie. This is an intense movie, a really gripping movie. I saw it in IMAX, and that was awesome. So I loved everything about it. Even like the mustache to me didn't bother me. So all that stuff I really enjoyed. I thought it was an excellent movie, one of my favorites of the year for sure. And Robert Eggers' hot streak keeps going.
Yeah, I still haven't seen that or the original, so, I'm a little behind. I know people, when they hear me say that, they're like, "What? Like, you didn't see it in a film class or anything?" I'm like, "Yeah, maybe, like, clips, but no, I haven't seen it." I plan
SpongeBob.
on seeing the original first and then getting into the new one. Um, I know I never really thought too much about, like, Lily Rose Depp, like, Holt has always been someone that I've had a lot of respect for in both kind of more pop culture stuff, like, obviously, he gets to play the Beast in, everything that we see in, like, the Fox
Mhm.
younger versions of the characters, alternate universe, X-Men and their timelines, that doesn't really ever make sense, but, that version of that character, he's pretty good at. So, I enjoy that stuff. If anything, I really did like him Warm Bodies, which is, like, a very underrated zombie romance.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know he's been passed over for Batman. He got passed over for Superman. He's gonna be Luther. So, I'm very excited for that. I think that's probably one of the best castings since Gene. Though Gene had hair, which was never super great. But, I'm excited. I am really, 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 really excited. Really excited. So, I wanna watch it. And Lily Rose Depp, I always like I said, I thought she was kinda more bland. I know she was in I think it's, like, The King with, Timothée Chalamet, and
Oh, yeah.
that was
Forgot
really
about that
about
movie.
it. I think she was in The Idol with The Weeknd, which the trailers alone, I was like, "No, this just seems like everything wrong with entertainment, just trying to shove all these big people together, nepo babies and all this and that." But yeah, I mean, I saw a couple of her interviews recently leading up into Nosferatu, and she seems very grounded. And a lot of people are giving a lot of credit to her performance. So maybe she's turned a corner. Maybe I just haven't really appreciated her work before now, but I'm excited. All the clips I've seen from her in the film look very creepy and strange, which kind of seems perfect for breaking out of an image that like Hollywood and the media has kind of created for you and your acting style and performances. So yeah, I'm hyped. Definitely hyped. Definitely hyped. But we'll see. I'm so behind on stuff. I just finally got around to watching Anora. I need to see The Substance still. I know that's kind of come back. So many movies I need to catch up on. I'm still trying to update my letterbox reviews from like November. I think I finally reached December or something. So it's I'm a little bad about my movies right now. Trying to figure out my whole gaming calendar, and there's just too many good ones. I'm trying to like somehow like sneak in all of the Sonic live action stuff before the Sonic 3 is out of theater. So yeah, no Nosferatu's at the top of the list, but unfortunately that list keeps on growing.
Well, hopefully you have a chance to see a lot more of these. The Oscar nominations, I believe, are Thursdays, so hopefully
Yeah.
we get a lot of these re-released because I missed out on a few as well when they came to the theaters. But I did I had a full movie weekend a few weeks ago. Got to see Complete Unknown. I got to see Sonic 3. I got to see Nosferatu. There's still a handful of other things that are out currently around my area that I want to see, but I haven't gotten to see. One that just came out, I really want to see it, obviously, because it's getting Best Picture buzz. But you got to find the time, 4 hours with The Brutalist, because it's 30 minutes of commercials and 3.5 hour movie. But I want to see that. I'm very excited to check that out. Hopefully, I can check that out soon. But yeah, I highly recommend Nosferatu. I completely concur with all those people who are saying Lily Rose Depp was excellent. She is. She really carries the movie. She is the lead, and she does a great job of bringing that character to life. But some of Robert Eggers' most disturbing imagery, I would say, like out of all his movies, one of the brilliant things of The Witch is it's such a slow burn, incredible horror movie that like when it ends, it might be one of those things that you're like kind of bored with for the first hour, but then the last 30 minutes you're just completely engrossed in, and then it makes you want to rewatch it that first hour because you're like, oh man, that ending was worth it. Whereas like the lighthouse is kind of engrossing the whole time. And Northman is action packed and crazy visually the entire movie. But Nosferatu is a little bit more witch-esque. It's got some slow burn, but then it also has the occasional really disturbing looking image. There's one particular shot towards the end that I was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe they went there." So yeah, there were some great things about Nosferatu. Really love it. I want to check it out again. But I love all his movies so much that I don't know how to rank them because The Lighthouse is still my favorite, but Nosferatu's as good to me as The Witch and around the Northman level, maybe a little bit, but definitely I think on a character level, outside of The Lighthouse, which is almost a little bit of a cheat code because it's only 2 characters, but out on a character level, this is one of the more developed and fleshed out character movies that Eggers has done versus just being visual feasts. Where like Northman characters are pretty simple, but it's an incredible movie visually. This one has pretty complex characters, and definitely Nicholas Holt's version of Jonathan Harker. I forgot what his name is in Nosferatu's version, but Jonathan Harker being the Dracula character. I thought he did a great job as well. Maybe even better than Keanu Reeves in that
Really?
Coppola version. Keanu Reeves, I think, had more screen time, but his accent wasn't the best. But anyway, moving on. Check out Nosferatu. Hopefully, you guys have seen it or want to see it. It's really really good. Moving on to the next one, we have Anthony, who says, I'm most excited this year for Andor Season 2, all new Star Wars comics, and the Reign of the Empire novel. Yeah, all good stuff. Pretty excited for all of those as well. Reign of the Empire should be coming. We should be getting a review out for that earlier than when the novel comes out. We haven't gotten our code yet. I know Critical Thinker was asking us about that a little later. We have not gotten to start it yet, but hopefully we get the audio copy for that soon. We just got I always mess this title up. Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader. We got the audio review for that, or audio review copy for that recently. So I haven't gotten to start it yet, but it's not that long. So I'm looking forward to starting that. Such a great book, a great trilogy. It is a bummer though that we didn't get the like unabridged audiobook for Labyrinth of Evil first, because we do have one for Revenge of the Sith that came out back in the day. We do have one now for Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader. Would have loved to have Labyrinth of Evil 2, but alas, that did not happen. But I'm hoping to get a review out for that as soon as I can, but I got to start that pretty soon. And then we got Kylie Stewart's son, I believe, who should be still Kylie Stewart's son. Oh wait, no, this is the same comment I already read. Okay, Kylie Stewart's son. We'll get back to you a little later. Saw more comments you already had. Critical Thinker says, thoughts on the relaunch of Star Wars ongoing? Not particularly happy they're keeping the writer from the very mediocre Jakku Mini, plus the fact that they're putting a comic in this time period. Well, you heard our thoughts a little bit earlier, Critical Thinker. I think all those concerns are warranted. They're all fair, but we're looking forward to it just to see what it is. We'll pass our judgment once we get there. Critical Thinker also
Yeah.
says, sorry.
I just want to add one thing to that. I mean, we're we're, we're coming off of Battle Jakku. Yeah, both of us are bit struggling. Maybe be more so because I've been up to date with comics, with the continuity and all that. That's all fair. But I also want to give some grace to these authors and these writers and everything because they had to start the whole 2020 line. They weren't expecting COVID. Like, how does that affect their writing? How does that affect their timelines and everything? Like, maybe these series were never meant to be that long, right? And maybe Battle Jakku was meant to be a little longer, and somewhere along the way, you had to sacrifice different things. It happened with the Disney Plus shows. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't happen with comics, right? Especially with the change in publishers and everything. So yeah, I'm not trying to give any excuses. I'm not a super big fan of what's going on with Battle Jakku. I am definitely a little bit more of a defender of the 2020 lines because I think if you just take away the crossovers and look at what's there in the main stories, they do quite well. It's just really the arcs that kind of are stuck with Crimson Reign or stuck with or the Bounty Hunters recap with a different angle and all that that really hamper the story because suddenly Hidden Empire is not really tied into any of these, and the main lines do somehow shockingly incredibly well and continuing a lot of their momentum and not being like sidetracked. So I think there were lessons learned for sure by 2020. I don't consider them horrible. So I think that's why at the end of the day, I'm excited. I'm always gonna be excited about Star Wars, and I think I'm gonna be excited about like truly a fresh start, especially since this isn't gonna be like an era that we're going into for 5 years of just 1 year. All right. We're going into this new era where we're getting maybe the full 5 years, maybe a couple events in the first couple years post Return of Jedi with this newly announced Segura line. We're getting Legacy of Vader, which is finally tackling that gap between 8 and 9 that is essential for that character of Kylo and his transition back to Ben. We're getting the Jedi Knight series, which is all set for Episode 1. It's at the prime from the old Hasbro, uh, not leaks, but like, planned ideas for that line and stories with Star Wars and first episode. we're jumping, and we're getting even the Rise of Skywalker adaptation. Like, we're getting into this period of time where there's a lot more openness, a little bit more flexibility, and I hope that only adds to, like, pushing authors to give us their best work. I think that's the way to look at it, that we're not really running into, hopefully, the same crazy, life-changing, world-changing issues that the 2020 line unfortunately had, and that's affected the comics and the trajectory for at least 2, 3 years.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean by all that. And in 2020, and we're going to talk a little bit later with Critical Thinker talking about the quality of the Disney Plus shows and stuff, but I think the pandemic just set Star Wars on such a strange direction. Yeah, it affected everybody, but Star Wars was already in a transitionary phase right before it hit. It found its new hit right before the pandemic hit, and it had to kind of restructure everything about itself. The fact we've got Rise of Skywalker ending in 2019, right? The future Star Wars movies up for grabs, up for question. So many things on the table, and then you get Mandalorian, which surprised it in 2019, the 2020's Mandalorian season, and the Clone Wars seasons, which were massive hits as well. Then you also get the relaunch of all the comics that year. You have the start of the High Republic in 2021. It was like Star Wars was going through a massive change right as the pandemic hit, and I don't think it helped in any of their content because it changed structurally everything and the way it's all been spread out and published. It's one of the reasons why we got such quick releases for High Republic when it started, because a lot of the stuff they had written and they were planning on releasing in 2020, and then they pushed it to 2021. And now it's been spread out more because they're having to write while the releases are coming out versus being already done when a lot of stuff came out. So a lot of big changes, and we'll talk about the shows in a little bit here. Critical Thinker piggybacked on that last comment saying this might mean we're not getting a show or film in this period, which even then wouldn't be much of a problem if the books, comics weren't so small scale and low profile in the new canon. Well, I don't think this has anything to do with the new show. Personally, I don't think this means anything for a new show at all. I don't think we were going to get these characters ever in the gap between Battle of Jakku and Mandalorian. I really don't. In any type of film or show, I don't think that would be the case. So if we get them, it's going to be during the time of the Mandalorian, which I think is still completely up for grabs because until we get that first issue, we don't really know when this takes place. And so even then, when we get the first issue, we might not know when this takes place. So that is still completely up for grabs. I don't think this means anything for a possible appearance from those characters in TV shows or movies. So that's the first thing. Second thing about these being small scale, I would agree with you, but at times the comics have actually been bigger scale than the books. So I think if they
Yeah.
want to do something important, especially with these characters, they have done it in the past where they've given significant story to these comics and let the creators kind of run wild with these story beats. And that's something that's been a little bit better about comics than books and canon. With canon, you don't see those big details. Yeah, they might not be galaxy altering plots, but there have been big character details given to these characters in comics. And so I think there can still be really strong, consistent storytelling added that will elevate these characters throughout this run if that's the direction they want to go. But if they want to go in more of a direction of like, we're just treading water until we figure out what we want to do with these characters in the future, that's more of my concern for this era when it comes to the comics, just because it doesn't feel like they're close to having an actual trajectory for Luke, Han, and Leia in the Mandalorian part of the universe. And if they don't have that, then yeah, maybe we could have strong storytelling initially out of this series when you're closer to Battle of Jakku. But as you get further and further in, it's going to be more of a treading water feeling, more of a stagnant feeling. You're not going to be pushing the boundaries or pushing their story because you don't know where they are going and what they are doing. And so that's the big hurdle this series has that the other two haven't had. And I'm interested in seeing how they tackle that.
Yeah, I mean, that echoes a lot of my same thoughts. Yeah, I like I said, and I think like had Liam has said, like make these characters leading into Metaverse have a big, big chunk of the story in books. That's kind of where they'll be able to truly shine. But comics can be great supplemental material for like a lot of the other stuff, right? Like maybe some of those Bantam era books like Crystal Star and all that don't really get made today, but they make more sense for like the scope of a comic, right? And I think that's how we have to look at it. Star Wars was nowhere near the same multimedia when Phantom Era first kicked off. It was just a bunch of books, maybe some young adult books. Well, actually, young adults didn't even really exist at that point until like Young Jedi Knight. So it was really just the adult novels and then some like kid books, right? Like Jedi Prince. It's not well regarded today, but that was really the first really push for that kinda age range, and really, you could say Star Wars made that first big push to, like, different tiers, different ages, different scopes of their story with the Shadows of the Empire multimedia initiative, right? I think that's the first time that they're like, "Oh, we can do original story with multiple levels that isn't tied down to having a movie at the center of it." So, if we're gonna look at it in an inverted way, why would we say that there isn't a chance for a movie or isn't a chance for a show and all that? Definitely is. You just have to give enough gaps and focus and space for this to still be unique to the medium, feel like it's using the medium well, doing great things with the characters that then can inform other shows and other movies even that eventually will lead into the Mandoverse. I think that's always gonna be a possibility. Now, do I think we're gonna get live action out of them? No, but if we can get maybe some, like, feature presentations at like, the special presentations, kinda like how we did for Marvel, why not? I think that'd be, like, a good, nice test run, and that's where comic books and books can inform the character and, like, flesh out a lot of the stuff that has been missing with Luke, I'd say with his Mando appearance in well, not Mando appearance, in his Book of Boba Fett appearance, where it's like, okay, he's kinda getting a lot of the stuff that I feel is there in Legends, that I feel is there with what canon is leading us to, but I'm not really understanding why he's so adamant about this almost prequel skewed view. It would make more sense if he got to actually have a longer running medium, a longer format where he is a lead. So, I'm always gonna be excited for the comic, what it can lead to, and if it's the only thing right now, I think it's still gonna be very, very informative to the eventual next live action appearance in the Mandoverse era.
Critical Thinker's next comment was, do you think the quality of the Disney Plus shows will ever improve, or do you think we're just stuck with the constant slew of inconsistent and mediocre content we've been getting recently? Like if Star Wars was getting HBO quality shows consistently, it would be great and could do wonders to improve word of mouth and win back the interest of non-Star Wars fans, but Disney doesn't seem interested or is just incapable of maintaining the quality of their shows. For every skeleton crew or andor we get, there's a bunch of mediocre content that results in more apathy both from the fan base and from the general public. If you were in charge of Disney Plus shows, what would you do to improve quality and word of mouth overall? So that's a big question, and it's one we talked about and thought about, I'm sure, a lot. I know for me personally, I'm excited for the future. And I know, critical thinker, you in particular have expressed your apathy towards what's going or what has been coming out from Disney Plus Star Wars. And I can't necessarily disagree with you. I mean, especially this year, as you guys all know, not to keep hammering it down, but this was truly the first time I had a Disney Plus show from Star Wars that I genuinely didn't like on any level, and that was The Acolyte. And so to have that first time, whereas, even with Book of Boba Fett, which I didn't like, but there were moments. It had good moments, and the Mando 2.5 was, I thought, really, really great. Obi-Wan had its moments. I thought was much more positive than negative, even if the negatives were pretty dumb. Ahsoka, much more positive than negative. So overall, I've enjoyed a lot of the positives more than the negatives of a lot of these shows, even if to a lot of people they have been mediocre. I've liked some of the ambitious things they've done with certain series. And then when it comes to the big hits like Andor, I thought they were excellent. Mando season 1 and 2, excellent. Clone Wars season 7, excellent. But yeah, and Skeleton Crew I enjoyed. I thought it was a good season overall. I enjoyed the Bad Batch for what it was over the course of its time. Tales of the Jedi was good. Tales of the Empire was disappointing. But overall, I feel like they've been a hit and miss. It's been hit and miss, to be kind, about 50-50. Almost one out of every other thing is going to be at least good in some capacity or average. Then you have the occasional bombs like Acolyte and the occasional massive successes like Andor. Uh, but overall, why I'm excited is because Star Wars seems to be actually planning out a future. And I'm not just talking about with announcing things and saying we're going to make this. It seems like they've taken these last few years and developed an actual plan. And that's what's exciting to me, is that it seems like with the promotion of Dave Filoni to CCO, with Jon Favreau now moving back to movies with Mandalorian and Grogu, with the doubling down of this era, of the New Republic era, being one of the center points of the entirety of what they're doing. It just seems like they've reinstilled a confidence in the fact that they know a direction they want to head. Now, we can still speculate about all the other movies that they're going to do, the Ray project, the Shawn Levy project, whatever other Taika Waititi, if it ever happens, all the other things that could possibly come out, Dawn of the Jedi. But when it comes to the New Republic era, it seems like they're going back to their roots. Mandalorian season 3, for all its flaws, what it did at the end, I really appreciated, in that it got rid of the things that were holding it down as a show, and it started over. So we're back to kind of where we were at the end of season 1, around season 1, where it's a show about Din Djarin and Grogu, and now in this case, it's a movie. So I'm looking forward to it, just because I think they've taken this time to actually start to develop a plan, and hopefully with that planning comes a more consistent level of quality, a more consistent appreciation for their budget, and actually adherence to their budget. When you say HBO quality, it's not been for a lack of money. They've put a lot of money into these shows. The Acolyte, $180 million. Skeleton Crew, I don't know if we know the exact number for that, but it seems to be similar. And we've heard it's the most expensive show they've made. So they've put a lot of money into these things. So, Game of Thrones at its peak was costing around that much, maybe a little bit more. So it's not for the lack of money. They're just spending in the wrong places, and they're not making the most of it. And so I think all the pieces are there. Now, the other thing that gets me confident is that all of the things that we've seen, right, up to and through Andor season 2, all of those were announced not only under Bob Chapek, who was CEO at the time in 2020, but were announced 5 years ago. So we have completed that initial run of Star Wars projects, and for Lucasfilm, it's actually been a pretty successful period, because only like 2 of the things they announced didn't happen. So for them, their track record was a little better than it's been.
Yeah.
So I think wrapping up that period, not only are we moving on to a new period in terms of where Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau want to take the franchise, but transitioning in CEOs of Disney, Bob Iger, who famously in his biography or autobiography wrote about his failures with Star Wars and his disappointments in the way he handled Star Wars, and they rushed Star Wars as a franchise. I think that you can rely on his incredible leadership, which, whether you like Disney and Star Wars or not, he has been one of the most successful film executives to ever be a part of any type of major studio. So I think with his direction, with the creatives that are involved currently, and the fact that we're finally in a transition phase, and even though for our show and for my love of Star Wars, I'm hoping we get more Star Wars in the second half of 2025. As somebody who wants the Star Wars content to be good, I would be actually more confident that it's going to be great if we don't get anything after Andor season 2 for over a year and a half, basically, or about a year and a half, and then get Mandalorian and Grogu, because that would mean this truly was the end of a previous era. There were good moments, there were bad moments, there were a lot of mediocre moments, but we're transitioning into the next era of creatives and storytelling. And so for me, that's why I have a little bit of confidence going into 2026, because I think this one period is over. We've moved on to the next period. We've seen what works and what doesn't work. We've braved the storm of the pandemic and then the strikes back to back. All of those things have happened, and some of the shows have been worse for it. Some of the shows have been better for it. But now we're moving into making quality a focus instead of quantity. And that's something that Bob Iger has been saying consistently over the last few years. It's been something that you've heard his approach with originally before Disney changed CEOs. And I think that's the main reason that I think you should feel confident and you should expect improvement. Now, if we get to 2026, 2027, and nothing has changed, then I think I'll be with you and be very, very scared for the future. But if the quality level at least hits, 7 out of 10 every time, I think we can be pretty happy with that, especially with the amount of content that will be coming out.
Yeah, I mean, as someone whose fandom with Star Wars really started kicking off really with that post Return of no, sorry, post Revenge of the Sith era, where, I endured, to put it nicely, a lot of Jar Jar episodes and, some really rough couple of arcs in the first couple seasons of the Clone Wars. If I had the mentality that it couldn't get better, then I wouldn't be watching or bothering to watch season 7 of Clone Wars, waiting for it to be in some way released or whatnot, right? So I look at it the same way with Disney Plus, right? Like this was 1.0, and a 1.0 that misguided in a lot of ways, I think, because in 2019, every freaking studio is like, we can do streaming, right?
Mhm.
HBO kind of was already doing it as a premium cable service, but they're like, yeah, it's really not that much more of a step for them. And I think people really underestimate why HBO has also been super successful. It's not that they were streaming from the start. Max was not, it's just their more formal version of that. And you can honestly look
Yeah.
at a lot of their Max originals before they canceled it, their plans for Max movies, the Max DC universe was not good. It was much closer to what you're seeing with Disney Plus and a lot of the canceled Netflix stuff that you see. So, HBO and, like, cable subscription in general power so much more than you think than streaming ever does, especially since a lot of these streamers started off with 6 or $7 fees, right? Like, yes, they can put in that money, they're willing to be, like, on in the negative for a couple years before they get into the green. Yeah, I understand all those things, but HBO has been a name brand for 20 something years before streaming even became something that they considered, right? And look what they did with Game of Thrones, right? They had every chance to be like, nope, we're going to strip away Benioff and Weiss. We're offering 10 seasons, 10 episodes each. We can put in new showrunners and all that. And they still deferred. So it's not like they can't make big mistakes after having an incredible adaptation of a book series that was incomplete, right? So uh, I think Star Wars, the benefit of that is that we're always getting something new, even if we're going from stuff from Legends. We're not tied down to any of that sort of stuff. HBO shows have started normalizing again. They've definitely had a rough patch too. I don't know why people act like they didn't. They definitely did too. And COVID, again, that ruined so many things for so many people. Now, to your point, critical thinker, yes, they need to put way more investment in writing. And I don't think it's necessarily the writing itself, it's the planning going into the writing.
Mhm.
What are we writing? Why are we writing? How is this going to affect the storytelling in 2, 3 years of other stories and all that? That hasn't really been a consideration. If you look at that 2020 investor slate, they Kennedy and a lot of other people have basically hinted or outright said, like, we're kind of forced to announce stuff that wasn't ever worked on, right? It was a lot of the sins of the sequel trilogy era of Iger, where he was shoving and forcing the sequel trilogy out every other year with the a Star Wars story in between. And that mentality never worked. Again, Disney's biggest issue is that they've always treated Star Wars as like, hey, you can have a big movie every single year, you can pump it out like the MCU, and it's never been like that. There's always a mythicism to it. There's a little bit of an aftermath to whatever Star Wars stuff comes out, and we've kinda lost that. So I think we're no matter what, we're gonna get a little bit bigger pauses. Now, what that means is probably like 6 months. It's as opposed to 3 months with Star Wars stuff, especially live action stuff. So time definitely does help Star Wars in so many ways. We've seen it with the prequels, we've seen it with the Clone Wars and everything. So I'm confident about that. I think if we improve the runtime too, to instead of having so many shows have episodes that are 30 minutes or less, even if you don't like a show, you can at least understand what a show is doing when it's got closer to 40 minutes per episode on average. That's what they can pull. If you're trying to bring the HBO example, that's what they can pull from HBO. Have scenes where your characters are literally just talking and having dramatic
Yeah.
exchanges. Star Wars definitely needs that. And even in the movies, they have that. It's missing in a lot of these shows. Even in Skeleton Crew, which I really did enjoy. I think that back half loses a lot of its, mystery about Atton because they're trying to move so many different pieces along, and they have shorter episode runtimes. So even the kids, which you have to give them the emotional scene over the parents, they're only limited to one. So what happened to the parents? They didn't get anything other than the 400-meter relay, right? So that's kinda how I look at it. It's like all these flaws were apparent with streaming, with Disney's leadership, with Chapek being the straight to DVD, straight to VHS merchant of Disney once upon a time. and how he also really screwed over the parks too, and not just streaming, right? And then the whole streaming bubble bursting. Everything's settling out, and I think that affected Star Wars as a whole, but obviously especially Disney Plus because 2019, you couldn't tell anybody that streaming wasn't gonna be the next frontier. It was in some ways seemingly replacing stuff, right? But now what are some of the most critically acclaimed franchise stuff? Look at The Penguin. It's set in the Batman universe, but it's never meant to try to outdo it. It's meant to be like a nice interchapter, like something you can watch. If you don't, whatever, right? Like, and that's what streaming always is going to be. Same thing happened in the 60s with movies and TVs. Everyone thought studio systems collapsing. This is a great time now for TV to take over. It didn't. It just needed to be a little bit of a reinvention. And I think that's what's happening. We're going to get the 2.0. There's a lot of lessons learned. We got Kinberg working on at least landscaping all the race stories moving forward, all the different decades and timelines that they want to achieve, all the different pockets of the universe. We're done with just spamming out stuff with Star Wars. Whatever comes out, even if it does feel like, oh, there's still so much going on, I feel like we're gonna feel like it's connected and it's been a bit more well thought out. And there's a couple extra minutes here, and oh, that scene feels a little bit more polished than it would have 4 or 5 years ago. We were just in a weird time for the world and for creativity in general. And I think for with how it takes so much time to get a live action product out there, yeah, we're finally getting past any vestiges of that era. Now we're and into the brave new world, you could say, of Star Wars. So I'm excited, just like Liam is, and the fact that they've already finished filming the Mandalorian Grogu, and they're gonna give it a year and a half basically of post production, of whatever reshoots are needed. They're keeping everything close to the chest, close to the vest. I think that only gets me more hyped because let's be
Mhm.
honest, like it we knew too much about so many of these shows. Now we're like, "What are we getting from Mandalorian Grogu? Why is it being reworked this way?" That mystery that's building up for me now, and I think we've been missing that for this kind of period where we're just like, "Okay, we're gonna get another show. Oh, we're gonna get another show. Oh, we're gonna get another show." We kinda know that's gonna be this kinda now we're just like, "Who knows?" And that's exciting. It's the how I feel about the comics right now, and it's definitely how I feel about live action.
The unknown is sometimes the best thing when it comes to expectations and all of that as well. Like, I think, DC did that recently, and, we still don't know the fruits of that because we haven't seen Superman, but
Yeah.
I think it's gonna pay off for them to have taken a couple years break and to say, "Hey, let's actually figure out what we're doing here," instead of just like, "Oh, are we gonna bring Cavill back randomly in Black Adam? Are we gonna do this or that?" DCEU plummeting in box office, plummeting in confidence. They rebooted, and that's the same thing that's gonna happen here. It's very similar. They started on a huge high. Mandalorian, excuse me, season 1, big high, surprise hit, starting that streaming service. It really doubled down probably their idea that like, hey, streaming's the way forward. Look at Mandalorian's massive for us. It was way bigger in like Christmas time merchandise sales than The Rise of Skywalker was in the same year, and that was our big theatrical release movie. Then they have 2020, and it's even bigger because season 2 was even more beloved by a lot of people in Clone Wars. So it just they had so many early successes that it just kind of doubled and tripled down their thoughts that this is what we need to do. And then they announced that huge slate, and that's where it all kind of falls apart. And Marvel's done the same thing. And I'm not disagreeing with you, critical thinker. This has been a really messy time for Star Wars. The writing has been subpar in a lot of ways. It is underwhelming and not what it should be. But Star Wars and HBO are very different. First of all, with Star Wars, a lot of people want to try to frame Star Wars as a feeling, as a universe. To me, and one of the reasons I made that one video about is it time for a Legends offshoot universe, is Star Wars is not necessarily a feeling or a universe to a lot of people. It's a group of characters. It is the Skywalkers. It's Anakin and Luke and Obi-Wan and Han and Leia. That's what Star Wars is to people. It's not like Marvel where there's hundreds of superheroes and basically if you have a cape, you are now a part of this universe or you have a name that with a different animal, you can be a part of this universe now. That's not what Star Wars is. And so Star Wars treating it like Marvel, which is what they've tried to do in some ways, treating it like other franchises is it's like Star Wars is a franchise that can make anything or any character popular, but it's also one that is very difficult to do so because to a lot of people, it's Star Wars is much more confined. It's something that's specific to the George Lucas movies. It's hard to capture that spirit in any other way outside of those characters. And yeah, books work because they're books. But if a lot of those stories are spread to a lot of other people, people might have a lot of different feelings because there are just OT only watchers. There are prequel and OT only watchers. All those people are consuming these shows and movies, right? So it's a very difficult thing to figure out and to do. And so, whereas HBO might be adapting a book series like in Game of Thrones, or it might have a big, expansive multi-season story like The Wire or The Sopranos. We also forget, and I think Sinek made a good point, with Disney Plus being something that started in 2019, HBO has had 30 years to figure out what their style is and how they do their shows, right? So it's very difficult to compare Disney Plus to HBO. And yeah, I would because the money's there, I think we're all really disappointed in the products that we've seen. Even the best Star Wars products haven't necessarily looked like they should or felt like they should. And I completely agree with you on that aspect because we need Star Wars to develop what their look and style and feel is on streaming. And that's something they have to do on top of just planning out the stories and planning out the universe is figure out what does Star Wars streaming look like and feel like? We've had too much inconsistency in terms of Obi-Wan looking terrible at times, but then also looking good at times. We've had Ahsoka look great for most of it, but then there are moments
Yeah.
that don't look as good. Some of their worst stuff, like Mandalorian season 3, looked great, but the Acolyte did not look good. Skeleton Crew looked great, but nobody watched it. So like there's there's just so much inconsistency in visuals, so much inconsistency in style, and that's where as a studio Disney and as a studio Lucasfilm either need to clamp down and say we're making everything look the same and we're making it all this similar type of quality. It will help their visual effects artists because they'll have a specific way they work on things, and rather than verifying or making variations of every different thing, right? That's what Game of Thrones can do. It's one universe, it's all set and it looks similar. So every season looks the same. Star Wars got all these different worlds, all these different cultures and people and species. There's a lot of different things to put money towards. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of differences, I think. So it's not just a one-to-one comparison. It's not me, you defending Star Wars. I've been very critical over that Star Wars and Disney and the way Lucasfilm has handled all this stuff over the last year. But I think it's nothing's one to one, but it does. The one thing I absolutely agree with you on is it's a top to bottom thing. You have to start from the top and say, this is how we're going to do it. And this is what we're going to emphasize. And if you don't do that, if it's just like, hey, John Favreau, you want to make the show, go do it. Like that's kind of the approach they've taken. And when you do that, you have each filmmaker attaching a different style, a different look, and a different vibe and wanting different things in their show. Star Wars is so big, you can have so many different things. That's what's caused a lot of this, I think, as well. Whereas if you're a studio and you say, hey, this is our way of making it, Feige-esque, but in terms of TV, you do that. This is our way of making it. What can you do under the constraints that we have now laid out for you? I think they need more of that. You need people like to, hype up creators, the creatives. And I'm pro creative as well because I'm a creative, but sometimes you need a firm hand at the top. And if there's not a firm hand at the top saying this is exactly how we do it, and you need to do it our way, and you be creative and figure out a way to do it our way, I think that's what leads to it. So Star Wars is just on too many different things, too many different ways. And as for a way to kind of fix that, I think a KOTOR, that's been the big rumor. KOTOR recently is their next thing they might start working on. I think KOTOR would be the perfect type of thing to do because that could be something that if you did it for 7 seasons, you could develop a specific style, a specific look, a specific set of characters. You can make all of that work and exist. You can plan it out. You can plan out your first 3 seasons. You can plan out your end game, all of that. And you can focus on it and creating that world and making sure it comes out the way you want it to versus these like kind of patchwork shows, as great as Andor is, it has to be set at a certain time period with a certain set of characters. Skeleton Crew, if they're attaching it to New Republic, it kind of has to be away from some of those events, but has to also tease them in some ways. Mandalorian has to be tied to certain things. Ahsoka's got to touch on Thrawn and all these different things. when you go fully away from it, I think that's when you can start to see Star Wars and Lucasfilm and the creatives behind it all start to truly find their identity because the restraints are moved or are removed from the projects and they can really just focus on what do we want Star Wars to be and how do we want it to look. And I think those are the types of things that they really need to focus on in the future.
Yeah, can't really add much more than that. I think we're excited and we have our hesitancies, but with our background, with our connection to Star Wars, just like all of you, the whole mix of it, and the fact that we do this channel to be critical yet positive about Star Wars, that's just kinda gonna be our slant here, you know?
Mhm.
Maybe things change, maybe we get a little more acolytes than we get Andors. Hopefully, that's not the case because, that was just another example of a, "Hey, you're a creative person, you've been interested in Star Wars, go ahead," and it seemed like it was gonna be super tight with High Republic. I think you can love it as a show on its own maybe, but I don't know if you can love it as, like, a High Republic tie-in, right? Even if you love the High Republic, it doesn't really have a lot of what makes those books really special to us, and that initiative special to us. So, planning, as these franchises get bigger and bigger and bigger and span decades and decades, you know, it's gonna become harder and harder. I mean, comics have to do their golden age to their silver age, modern age. We've now started seeing franchises that are multimedia like Star Wars age to the point that they're, like, 70 not 70, but, like, they're, like, 50 something years old. Like, that's hard to be consistent about, no matter how well intentioned you are. So, now we've reached the point where everyone's got their own opinion of what Star Wars is, what they era they like, what story they like, what type of Star Wars they like. So the only thing you can really do is plan it, right? And we can't just let people be super creative anymore, unrestrained, because that doesn't always work out, especially with the fact that, like Liam pointed out, you have to make so many new things for Star Wars. An HBO show made today could use the same sets from The Wire or The Sopranos and redress some stuff up from the 60s and 70s from all the collections they have in Warner Brothers. And they just talk and set its stuff in real time in the current day. It's a lot easier to work out. It's not the same when you have to be like, "Hey, here's a goofy alien. It's got a elephant trunk nose, but a mouth that's animatronic and CGI and a child actor." That's not the same as hiring a child actor at all, right? So it's like that those are those things that we consider. Maybe that doesn't come to mind immediately, but now that we've seen, like, that first run and the ups and downs of that, well, now we've got a foundation. Let's see where they go from here.
Moving on to the next question is from Critical Thinker as well. And this is I guess kind of goes with what we've been talking about in some ways. Critical Thinker says, "How did this channel start?" Well, we've gone into this story a little bit over the years, but kind of piggybacking off of what we just talked about, because we did start it technically and at the end of 2020. We didn't start the channel at the end of 2020. We started our podcast. And so, from what I remember, really, it was kind of like throughout 2020, Sonic and I went to the same college. We were both in film school. We were in a couple classes together, and we were in the same film fraternity and all these different things that crossed over our interests, right? And through all those conversations, we both found out that we like Star Wars, and we both had similar levels of advanced knowledge on Star Wars that were much higher than most people we knew. So that developed into a friendship, but we met each other towards the end of college, and when we graduated in 2020. So it was a weird year, like it kind of our college experience just ended. And, we all thought we might be coming back for this, that. We were in a class where we're working on, it was one of the more advanced film classes. We're working on developing this entire short film, supposed to be like a thesis film. And it started as, okay, we're going to delay production for a couple weeks. And then it turned into, okay, you guys might be home for a month. And then it turned into, yeah, we're actually not doing that. Into like, you got to make
Middle.
something at home with your family and all this type of stuff. So anyway, but we always kept up with each other and texted each other and had a group message about Star Wars with another friend who was originally on our podcast, but kind of stopped doing it with us after only a couple months. I think Jared was on there
Yeah,
for
to be fair,
two,
Jay
two
did get a
months.
Lucasfilm internship, so that probably makes
Yeah.
it a little complicated.
Yeah, so we had that, and then we decided, hey, let's, everybody's doing podcasts in 2020. Let's just make our own where we can talk about it. And if, some of these conversations that we have actually appeal to other people as well, maybe we could start, doing something with that. We're all just at home doing nothing. So um, we started that, and we started the podcast talking about the Mandalorian season 2. And I believe we didn't even start it for the first episode. We started on the second
Oh,
episode.
yep.
Went to the end of it. Kind of were hit and miss after that when we would post new episodes. But one of the big things we jumped into right away was the High Republic. We jumped into the High Republic, turned it into like, a multimedia show, not just based on the popular TV shows and stuff we wanted to talk about, books. And in that meantime, I was like, I'm going to just create a YouTube channel for us because most of the podcasts I listen to are on YouTube. I'm just gonna put up our podcasts on there and see what happens. And we did, and we didn't do that well. But then I was like, well, I'm already doing the work to put it up. Let me just add in some pictures. And they started adding in some pictures and stuff over our, before it was just a blank image of our logo. And those started doing a little better. Then by the time we got to Bad Batch, we were like, hey, I think we should start doing focusing on the YouTube part versus the podcast part because we're getting as many, if not more, views, and we can just do video and then take it and put it on podcast as well. So that's kind of how it started. And then, YouTube started doing a lot better for us than podcast, and we were enjoying it. And it kind of aligned with some of our interests in terms of like, going to film school and knowing how to edit and doing all those types of things. And it just became a little bit more, for me at least. I enjoyed the process of making videos because it was something I always wanted to do. I had an interest in it. I was really into YouTube, as a lot of kids this generation are, but I was really into YouTube, 2011, 2012, like when I was in 8th grade, early high school, throughout most of high school. I was really into YouTube. There were a couple times where I was like, I want to start a YouTube channel, but then I would record myself talking about something and be like, this is terrible. I hate this. And I never did it. And then, yeah. And then, so once we kind of started developing this on camera presence a little bit, started getting more comfortable being on camera. I was getting more comfortable talking because you hear YouTubers say this all the time, and it's so true. But it doesn't feel like it's true, but it is true. The fact that it takes a lot of time and work and effort to get good at talking to a camera, to talking to nothing, And, one of the things
Oh
that helps for
yeah.
sure is that there's two of us, right? So we can talk back and forth. But even on individual videos we make by ourselves, it's a lot more difficult. But now it's something I do without even thinking because I think of all you guys watching it, and I'm like talking to you. I'm not just talking to myself. So that's definitely helped. So once we kind of got comfortable with that, I was enjoying the process, and we just kind of turned it into what it was today from there. Anything I missed, Sonic, or you want to add there?
Pretty comprehensive, to be fair, we were also debating last year, what is the future of the channel, right? And, we'd done some live streams. We used to use our live streams a lot more when we first started for the gaming portion of that. So
Hmm.
you might have seen me like try to answer a question, but be like fighting off like one of the bosses in Survivor and be like, I can't talk right now. I can't formulate some thoughts as my thumbs are trying to like avoid button mashing and dying. And then some games just wouldn't run great. This and the stream because I'm the one who runs the whole streaming setup and all that. So it became a little bit more difficult. So we were like, why don't we just like kind of shift to like how we did our old podcast, right? Like just talk about whatever people want to talk about, whether it be Star Wars or whatnot. Like that's kind of how we were doing it. But let's just separate it out from the gaming. So yeah, I mean that's really been a big boon for our channel. That's what allows us to like more directly talk to you. That's definitely improved a lot of our more talky videos, and we know exactly the type of people are on our channel who we've cultivated too. So that's a really fun thing. But yeah, I mean, last year at some point we were like, all right, we have to make some changes there. Okay, gaming's not doing so great. Some of our videos are ups and down. We weren't sure if we're gonna make this channel as big as it is now, and kind of exploded. We use shorts. We used a lot of more interesting new series. We didn't necessarily have a lot of original videos like we did in 22 and 23, but you're gonna see that more now that we've become a little bit more confident. There's more gaps this year. The podcast still technically exists. I'm just gonna make it 1-to-1 to what we have here on YouTube. It it's I'm not trying to alienate those people, but, like, if maybe you wanna hear us talk on this live stream, but you're driving, right? Like, where it's you can listen to it on YouTube or you can listen to it on podcast, right? The idea is that you should be able to always listen to us because 'cause we've become better speakers and better at, formulating our conversations and getting some nice flow and rhythm with you guys, and we always repeat what you're saying, so that way you don't have to look at a screen or anything, so this is still very much podcast coded as a channel, but, we're still trying to kinda get into some of the stuff that worked for us before, but make it make more sense for the channel, right? So, get excited, get pumped for this 2025, you're gonna see a lot more, like, right now, this is kinda how this channel is looking like if it was gonna be more like a 3 or 4K channel by the end of 2024, maybe 5K, right? We weren't expecting 22,000 of you guys to, like, are subscribed to our channel, so we're really building out the foundation now, we're in the planning stages, we've got time before Andor, but hopefully, if you guys stick around by the time Andor season 2 starts, our social media is all up to date again and a lot more advanced, a lot more social media specific, like, content, like, what makes sense to be on here versus on podcasts and all that, and a little bit more professional looking. We're trying to compete with the big dogs, and because we think we've cultivated a strong audience here, and we've been able to talk Star Wars in a mature, respectful way that I think you guys all appreciate, and, the best is yet to come. That's the way I'm gonna look at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want to take our channel to the next level this year. I mean, video content has been our bread and butter in terms of, what we pride ourselves on the channel, especially. And last year, tried a couple different directions for it. Had a lot of times where, we just had a lot of things coming out and a lot of things to cover, and we couldn't make as many original things. And I'm looking forward this year making a lot more original stuff because that's one of my favorite things to do on the channel is make videos and formulate arguments and theories and all that stuff. So looking forward to that. But yeah, thanks for the question. It's always fun to talk about the past, and it's crazy how much things have changed. I mean, it's crazy that our channel has been, technically we've existed for 4 years, which is crazy uh, to me. Like when we think about it, and it's been such a journey, an up and down journey in terms of growth that
Sure.
it really feels like we haven't been around as long, but, yeah, we're working hard to try to make it better and better, so hopefully you guys enjoy that, and hopefully you guys enjoy these formats and, we're always open to any suggestions as well because we wanna make stuff you guys wanna see, so if you have any thoughts on a certain type of live stream you'd like to see or a certain video you'd like to see, any of that type of stuff, let us know. If you become members of our Patreon and YouTube membership programs, there is a tier that you actually get to like pick the video that we make. But if you let us know your thoughts on things you might want to see, we can try to come up with our own direction for how we get there as well. We've reached almost 2 hours of the stream, so I feel like we should call it there. That's a good one to end on. And we didn't get to too many of the chat. Sorry about that. There was a lot of great chats tonight, but we had some big stories to cover since this was our first news stream in about a month and a half, 2 months. So we had some things to get to. A lot of smaller stories or older stories we didn't get to. So unfortunately, we didn't get to talk about those. Might talk about them next week if we don't have anything else to discuss. But if no news comes out, that's the positive of all these Ask Us Anythings is that if nothing else comes out between this Tuesday and next Tuesday, you guys get to send in all the questions you have again. And yes, Brandon, I'd love to talk DC with you next week. So send those in next week. Join us next week. We'll try to get to them all. Hopefully, we'll make it a more chat focused stream. But we had to spend like the first hour to hour and 20 minutes on all that news today. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed tonight's stream. Again, if you're new, join us every Tuesday, 7:30 Pacific time. We talk about Star Wars and anything else you guys would like to discuss. So make sure you join us every week for that stream. Please like the video. It's one of the easiest things you can do, and it really helps us out in a lot of ways. If you're interested in Patreon and YouTube membership, there are a lot of perks for not just this live stream, but other live streams that you can get exclusively over there. There's also perks for videos and all that type of stuff. So keep an eye out, look up those services, see if there's any tier that's right for you. Helps out our channel immensely. And it also gives you guys some extra stuff. So look at all of that. Keep an eye out for more video content. Finally, Tears of the Nameless review will be up tomorrow. So check that out if you're somehow still interested in that. It's more of a backlog thing. We filmed that like a month and a half ago and just haven't had a day to put it up because it was already old a month and a half ago. And then hopefully you're excited at the end of the week. I've got my bookshelf tour will be up on Friday if you're interested in that. It does have a lot of new books, a lot of other stuff to see. So hopefully you guys enjoy that content, and stay tuned for next week for even more great stuff. Shorts every week, community polls also every single day. So keep an eye out for all that. Thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody. We enjoyed talking with you, and we will see you all next week. Have a good night, everybody.